Prime Minister, thank you so much for speaking to Bloomberg. Now, you've said that you will seek some broad consensus in your next changes for the judicial. What are those?
Well, I think that we've already done quite a bit. I've stopped the judicial legislation for 3 months, seeking consensus from the other side, unfortunately not getting it, then brought in a relatively minor part of the reform, passed it, and then said, I'm still going to give it several months to try to get another consensus. What is it? It would probably be about the composition of the committee that elects judges.
With the selection of the judges?
Yes.
How they're selected?
Right. That's basically what's left. And because other things, I think we should not legislate. I don't think we should move from one extreme where we have perhaps the most activist judicial court on the planet to getting to a point where the legislature, our Knesset, can just knock out any decision that the court makes. There has to be a balance. That's what we're trying to restore.
So Prime Minister, when you look at the change in selection for the judges, how quickly could that come?
Well, if we get a compromise, it could come immediately. If we can't get a buy-in from the opposition in the parliament, there's always a buy-in from the public. What is the thing that the public accepts? And I'm giving it my best shot. I'm spending, I wouldn't say 24 hours a day on it. I'd say about 12 hours a day.
And if the public is not behind it, what do you do? Do you
I think
delay?
you should choose
stop?
something. I think you should choose something that has broad acceptance.
Which looks like what?
Which looks like something that I'd like to negotiate, not even on Bloomberg.
Okay, but give me a flavor of is it walking back some of the things that have been said by certain ministers
I think,
around you?
Oh, ministers can say anything. I don't control words in our parliamentary system. I control deeds, and that has to be understood. But since you know the European system, you know that unlike a presidential system, you don't control what is said by members of your cabinet.
But you can ask them to tone it down. Have you asked them to tone it down?
100 times.
And they're listening?
I succeeded 50 times.
And you'll continue to do so?
You don't always succeed. You don't always succeed. But that's what's important to understand is when the dust settles, are we going to have Israel that is stronger democratically, or is it weaker democratically? Is it something where you're going to have the balance that you need between the will of the majority and the rights of the minority or individual rights? Has that been strengthened, that balance, or has it been weakened? I maintain that it'll be strengthened. It certainly will not be weakened.
Prime Minister, there are a lot of questions, especially from investors, especially from businesses, because you always need a body that makes sure that anything that the government passes is legal. And there's maybe a perception problem, but this is weakened. So what is the message to business investors and to markets right now?
I don't think it's weakened. I think the ultimate regulator in democracies are not courts, but are the public choice. I think that's a fundamental misconception of how democracies work.
But you always need someone to overlook that.
But if you have a lousy government, then they're not reelected. That's the most important thing. The most important regulator is the political markets. But I don't think that we should in any way weaken the courts. There's a difference between an independent court and an all-powerful court. And I think what we're trying to do is bring back it to Israel where it was in its first 50 years, where there was an adequate balance between the courts, the legislature, and the executive.
But Prime Minister, there's a perception problem, maybe, if that's what you think, but there's certainly a division in this country with hundreds of thousands of people protesting and market participants worried about what happens next. What's your message to them?
When the dust settles, Israel will not only remain a democracy, it'll be even a stronger democracy, but more importantly, it will not in any way impair the enormous business and economic capabilities of Israel in the new technological age.
But Prime Minister, when does this dust settle? So far, you haven't even been prepared to say that you will follow what the Supreme Court decides.
No, we follow what the Supreme Court decides, and the Supreme Court so far has also followed the basic rule of not striking down basic laws, which they themselves deem are the basis of the Constitution. Both things have to be maintained.
So would you tell markets and investors today that whatever they decide, right, there's something big that's going to be decided in the next couple of months, you will abide by that?
I hope that we don't get into a constitutional crisis. I think we won't. I think there's a way of reaching an equitable compromise, which is what I'm trying to do. Now,
Right.
if I reveal to you everything that I'm trying to do, I won't be able to do it.
But the market wants to understand that there's nothing worse for the markets or investors to actually be in a limbo where you're not sure exactly what will happen or how the government will react.
I'm
will
absolutely
you abide
sure.
by the ruling?
I'm absolutely sure that Israel will come out stable and successful and democratic, at least as democratic, in my view, more democratic. I don't think we're going to tear the country apart. I don't think you're going to have civil war. I think right now what you're seeing is the natural conflict between two opposing views that have not yet meshed, but they will mesh.
Do you support your central bank governor, who is very well respected internationally?
Sure. I appointed him.
Will you back him for another term? He has to decide, I think, by next month.
Well, I haven't talked to him yet, but I will. But I've guarded, I would say, rigorously his independence, the independence of the central bank, and that will continue to be the policy. I will talk to him, but you wouldn't believe this, but we just not had the opportunity to discuss that.
But, Prime Minister, when you talk to him, will you ask him to stay on?
Possibly. I want to think about it. I haven't
What are you
had
thinking
time.
now?
I think he's been an exceptional central bank director, and I think that's a possibility that I'll have to talk to him about.
One of your ministers, I think, called him a savage for
So-
raising interest rates.
Yeah, well, my ministers in our hectic parliamentary system can say anything, but it's a fact that we've never intervened with the independence of the central bank, and we won't.
And so you
In fact, I think I passed some laws or corrective additional laws that safeguarded the independence of the central bank. I do not want the government broaching in on what the central bank has to do.
So do you support the interest rate hikes?
I leave that decision to the central bank. You know, I've had several central bank directors because I've been in government a long time. I think in a few months I'll be probably more time in as prime minister than anybody in the Western world for the last half century. So I've had a lot of central bank directors to talk to. I always talk to them in a padded room, absolutely soundproof, that we could, hurl at each other whatever we want. But when I come out, I always give backing to the central bank director.
But Prime Minister, it would be a pretty powerful message to the markets, given the divisions and given the turmoil, if you were to ask him to stay on.
Could be. That's a consideration. I'll consider it.
But do you agree? Would that be a powerful message?
I think the powerful message is the independence of the central bank. And I think the choices that I've made in bringing in central bank directors, whether it was Stanley Fischer and after him, the current central bank director, I think people see that we choose and choose well.
And that will not.
And some others in between. I don't want to.
And that will not change.
No, it will.
You're overhauling the judiciary, but the central bank won't be.
I'm not overhauling the judiciary. I'm correcting the judiciary to where it was. I don't think we'll get there, but to where it was at Israel's first 50 years, before the judicial imbalance was created. And I'm trying to bring it back modestly into line. This is described as the end of democracy. Why? Why is it described as the end of democracy? Because we say that the judiciary in Israel, and in Israel alone, cannot say, I'm striking down a government decision or a parliamentary law simply because I think it's unreasonable. That doesn't exist to that extent in any of the democracies.
No, but it's a check and balance, and this is what investors are worried about. So
plenty of checks.
So I was going to ask you, what's your message today for a business that wants to come here, that's a little bit nervous about what they can do longer term?
There is no absence of checks. In Israel, the courts have all the checks, but they have no balance. So if you're concerned that the court will not be able to intervene in certain decisions, they've got 100 different checks on that. But one thing that we want to have is not to be able to have the court intervene on anything, on any matter, without any reference to any statute or any law. That is not democracy.
Prime Minister, it's my understanding they've only done that a handful of times. But if you're an investor today, right, and you look at Israel, that has to deal with Saudi, that has to deal with Iran, why are you falling on the sword about the judiciary?
I'm not falling on the sword. I'm trying to correct an imbalance because millions of Israelis vote time and again for governments who want to have certain government policies, okay? and the governments are elected, and they want to enact their policies, and the Supreme Court often intervenes in ways that nullifies the will of the majority without any reference to a law. For example, I'll give you an example. We have foreign workers. Okay, Israel has been able to prevent the entry of foreign workers.
And Prime Minister, we're fully aware, but were you upset by hundreds of thousands of people in the street?
Well, there have been hundreds of thousands of the others. That's a reflection of democracy. Nobody describes the other side. We had 250,000 people in the street the other day supporting the judicial reform. You didn't hear a word about it.
But Prime Minister, you were the one that brought people together, right? That build bridges. What's happened?
Well, because it didn't happen overnight. When I did the economic reforms that made Israel an economic juggernaut, a free market economy, technological economy, I had huge demonstrations. I had a 5 months national strike, 3 months and 2 months from the labor union. I had, when I tried to take the gas out of the seabed, I had the same people who are organizing the strikes now saying this is the end of democracy. This will destroy our environment, mind you, substituting gas for coal, destroying the environment. But it's the same thing. Now they're saying we're destroying the democracy. That's nonsense. But I understand it's nonsense in my view. It's not nonsense in their view. They're genuinely concerned. And I think there's a happy middle ground there. I've always found it in other matters, whether it was in defense or Iran or free market economies or taking gas out of the seabed. I'll find it here as well.
Again, there's so much nervousness right out there when you speak to investors and when you speak to the markets. Give me a sense of what you would be able to do or to give to normalize a relationship with Saudi Arabia.
Well, Saudi Arabia, I think, is one of the exceptional things that tells you why I'm very optimistic about Israel. Really one of two reasons, one of two main reasons. One is that, well, I'll start with Saudi Arabia, but then I'll get with the other one. I think that we're about to witness a pivot of history. Maybe. I can't guarantee that it'll happen. But first, there is an economic corridor of energy, transport, and communications that naturally goes through our geography, from the Arabian Peninsula, from Asia to the Arabian Peninsula to Europe. We're going to realize that. Yeah. And by the way, my sense is we're going to realize that despite whether we have formal peace or not.
But do you have to give concessions? So we understand
probably,
Saudi Arabia.
Some, but
so
I think,
what would you give? Would you limit, for example, Jewish settlements in the West Bank?
Again, you have a good penchant as a good journalist to try to eke out from me my negotiation stance, and of course you're not going to succeed, but you could keep on trying. But do I think it's feasible to have that? And do I think that political questions will block it? I doubt it. If there's political will, there'll be a political way to achieve normalization and a formal peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
But, Prime Minister,
that has enormous economic consequences for your investors. And if they have to bet on it right now, I'd bet on it, but I can't guarantee it.
And Prime Minister, this is why I'm not trying to ink out negotiation taxes. I'm trying to understand what you're willing to give, because this is such an important partnership for Israel.
I'll tell you what I'm not willing to give. I'm not willing to give anything that will endanger Israel's security. That I will not do. But I think there's enough room to discuss possibilities. I think the Palestinian thing is brought in all the time. It was always brought in. And it's sort of a checkbox, you know. You have to check it to say that you're doing it. Is that what is being said in corridors? Is that what is being said in discrete negotiations?
I don't know. You tell me. What's being said?
The answer is a lot less than you think.
Okay, so if you look at, for example, giving the Palestinians their own state, is that something that you would? Is that a red line?
It won't be their own state. It'll be an Iranian-controlled state that will. In an area that is about the width of the Washington Beltway. If you take Israel and the Palestinian areas in Judea, Samaria, and the West Bank together, it's a little more than the width of the Washington Beltway. You put a Palestinian state, which will be controlled by Iran, in half of that, or in the middle of that, you won't have a Palestinian state. You'll have an Iranian terror state. And
so that's a no.
Of course, it's a no, yes.
So that under no circumstances would you allow that?
No, what I said often is that the way that I would have a solution is two things about that. One, that the Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves and none of the powers to threaten Israel. This means that in whatever final settlement, peace settlement we have with the Palestinians, Israel remains I would say Israel has the overriding security power in the entire area, ours and theirs. Otherwise, we collapse, they collapse.
Prime Minister, you're going to UNGA in New York, I believe,
Yes.
second week or third week of September.
Yes.
Will you
Yes.
meet with Donald Trump?
I don't know. No, but
Have you spoken to him on the phone?
You're the first to have suggested it. No, I haven't.
Are you expecting an invitation to the White House from President Biden?
Well, he said that we are going to meet, so I'll leave it up to him.
What are you most excited for going to UNGA?
Well, I've been there many years. You know,
I know,
It would be
many
my
times.
11th. What am I most excited about? The possibility of broadening the already historic Abraham Accords. I think this will change history. I think it will not only end the Arab-Israeli conflict, not the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but our conflict with 98% of the Arab world. It will also, I think, create a new peace between the Jewish state and the Muslim world.
But Prime Minister, the countries of the Abraham Accord, some of them have been frustrated, right, about some of the noise that's been coming out of your government. Will you meet with them to try and reassure them?
Well, we meet with them all the time, and we reassure them all the time. But I think some of them are habituated to the fact that noise is noise. And I think that's true of the markets too. There's a lot of noise in the market. But if you look at the fundamentals of Israel, if you look at the growth rate, which is double the United States expected now, you look at the deficit, which is 1.5 at most percent compared to 5.5% in the US. If you look at the debt to GDP, which is 60%, which is less than 100% in the US, and you know what it's like in the EU. And if you look at the investments, I mean, NVIDIA builds here the supercomputer. Intel just puts $25 billion for a
These
chip
are
plant.
prospects longer term, but you're right, they are
But
committed.
that's my point, that there's noise in the short-term markets.
Yeah.
There's clarity in the long-term markets. I mean, now Amazon just invests $7 billion in cloud services here. Why are they doing that? Because they know something I'm going to do. And the thing that I'm going to do, and I'd like to bring it to your investors' attention, a few years ago, 10 years ago, I decided that Israel would be one of the 10 cyber powers in the world, one of the 5. We've become one of the more than 5, higher than that. Now I think that what we're going to do is, and what I'm organizing is a government policy and a government board with money to make Israel one of the 3 top AI powers in the world.
Prime Minister, what do you say to investors that worry that you've changed in terms of priorities?
I haven't. My priorities are peace, prosperity, and security. I think that they're all dependent on prosperity, to have the ability to fund the defense needs that we have and to expand the peace. The prosperity is based on Israel's supreme technological prowess. We are, people rated us 7th on the AI list. You know why? Because of the absence of government policy. I'm changing that, and I'm going to announce in about 6 weeks the government policy, the organization, the project leader for a host of civilian and military AI that will thrust Israel right up there. If you're an investor and you're not seeing that the added value that is going to accrue to national economies is based on their ability to generate AI and use AI. This is not hype. This is Israel, and we have done that.
They're worried about the shorter term. But thank you so much for your time.
But remember this. Here's a good one. This is recorded today, all right? Now we shall look at 1 year from now. That's pretty short term. And we'll see, was I right in telling you that Israel right now is undervalued? You should invest in Israel. Smart money is coming into Israel now, like these big firms, because they understand that we're going to a good place.